everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. I hope you had a good weekend. There was news that took place over the weekend and news taking place right now. The Prime Minister of Israel's heart failed him over the weekend, which I thought that really stood out. When I first saw that story, I just kind of was like, oh, okay. But it's very interesting timing, and he's a very important prime minister in the world because he's the prime minister of a very important nation in the world, Israel, and his heart failed him. And we're going to look at the implications of that. There's an article that talks about potentially an attempt at an assassination. I don't know. It goes against what the news reports say happened, but would they admit that that's what happened for purposes of national security? The bill passed, the one that all these protesters are protesting. It passed just a couple hours ago at the time that I'm recording this. And there's a lot to look at. I want to look at what Iran has to say, not necessarily in this order. I want to see what Iran has to say, and it's a little concerning. We're going to look closer at this thing with Benjamin Netanyahu's heart failing. This is just kind of like it's unbelievable to me what's going on right now. So let's just start here. We're going to start with Israel 365, Nation's ninth day of Av, changing sadness to joy. This is Israel 365, and I just wanted to read this first part. The article is about kind of like something else, but I just wanted to read this first part so we can kind of like maybe see the context and potentially the context that the Lord is using with the Jewish people if he chooses to do something on the 9th of Av. According to Jewish tradition, Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish calendar and fast day commemorating the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, will be transformed into a joyous feast day in the Messianic era. So again, I think that the Lord works with nations according to their own understanding, especially the Jewish nation. And I have to reiterate, I think that it's important to understand the Jewish frame of mind, their beliefs, their traditions, because I think that that's how the Lord would prepare and prime them for the second coming. And so if they have this idea that Tisha B'Av would be turned from the saddest day to a joyous feast day, maybe that's what they'll get. Remember, if you didn't see the last video, or if you don't know what Tisha B'Av is, Av is one of the months on the Hebrew calendar. Tisha is the 9th. And historically, they consider it the day on which the first and second temple were destroyed, along with many other unfortunate things in Jewish history. So it's interesting. I would encourage you to watch that video where I go into it in more depth. But it might be a very fitting day that one of the key events of the second coming, if not the second coming to the Jews itself, happens on that day. Or the day after, or around this time. And there is something right now going on around this time. Tisha B'Av is coming up in a couple days. In fact, why don't we just look at the calendar? I should have had this up. Okay, so July 24th is today. Right here. Today is the 6th of Av, and Tisha B'Av begins at sundown on Wednesday, but like the full day would be Thursday. Okay, so something just to keep in mind as we're reading this. Okay, the yeshiva world. Reasonableness bill passes. First step in curbing Supreme Court's excessive power. The reasonableness bill was passed by the Knesset on Monday afternoon after a siege on the Knesset by anarchists. Now, this is interesting that yeshiva world is using that terminology, a siege, because that's something that I proposed. I think it was my last video. We a lot of times think that when Israel is invaded and enemy forces are taking over the country, with the final phase of the war being the siege of Israel, I think that we think of it in conventional terms. We picture tanks, missiles, lasers, I don't know, nuclear bombs, whatever. And that's pretty reasonable. I'm not so sure that that's going to be the case. It could be. We'll just have to wait and see. But I feel like if it was like a prolonged thing, it'd be too obvious. It would awaken too many people when the second coming is supposed to come as a thief in a night for those who aren't watching. And for those who aren't watching, I think that that would be too obvious. Um, put the world aside. If we're looking at the church and the people that don't like to talk about the second coming, for example, or the people that have their hearts too much in the world and material things, I think that that would be too obvious. Now, maybe that's how it'll happen, but I just think it would be too obvious. We discussed the probability that what we're seeing right now, since the beginning of this millennium, is World War III and a new type of warfare, which includes a lot of things that maybe haven't been used so much in the past, including color revolutions. And it's my opinion that that's what's going on in Israel. A color revolution, a way that they've realized to weaponize protests and try and stoke the flames and try to change governments when there's a government that's going against your overall political strategy. Um, so anyway, it's interesting. They're calling it a siege on the Knesset. If you don't know what the Knesset is, that's essentially the Capitol building, or the equivalent of our United States Capitol building where Congress meets. Okay, the Knesset is basically their Congress. It's under siege by all these protesters. The bill revokes the reasonableness clause, which allowed Supreme Court justices to knock down any law passed by the Knesset as long as it is reasonable in their view. Which, I don't know, that sounds kind of like broad power by the Supreme Court, which lent them excessive power over the elected government, unparalleled in any democracy in the world. Justice Minister Yariv Levin spoke from the plenum prior to the vote, saying, quote, "There's not even one example in the world of a blanket reasonableness clause which completely replaces the discretion of elected officials with the discretion of the judges." And that's all that. So this is like some of the other point of view. The other side that's against the judicial reform would have you believe that democracy is being taken away, that Netanyahu seeks to become a dictator and stuff like that. And I don't tend to agree with that, but I'm not about to make this too much of a political video, but I just wanted to show that. You can research that yourself. Water cannons and smoke grenades as anarchists block Knesset entrance. While calling for quote-unquote democracy, hundreds of anarchists tried to destroy the democratic process by blocking the Knesset entrance on Monday morning in a bid to stop the Knesset's advancement of the reasonableness bill. Isn't that kind of like irony? You're fighting for democracy and you're trying to prevent elected officials who are going about the government's business passing laws. You're trying to stop it because you don't like it. Yeah, that's democracy. Let's see, was there anything else here? So yeah, you have all these people fighting for democracy as they withhold services from the country, which is a part of a siege. When you block things like the doctors, they are going on strike, at least some of them. Military personnel are stepping down. There's talks of labor strikes. There's also banks and all these like different stores that are going to shut down. So yeah, take away products and supplies and services in order to enact some kind of change on a government. It's a siege. It's a siege. Okay, reasonableness bill passes 64-0 after compromise fails at the last minute. The reasonableness standard bill has officially passed into law, marking the first bill in the government's contentious judicial reform to pass into law after 6 months of fierce public debate and negotiations on a possible compromise that lasted until the last minute. The opposition boycotted the vote, and the final tally was 64-0. Every member of the coalition voted in favor of the bill. An agreement appeared to have been reached at one point as Defense Minister Yoav Gallant headed over to the opposition's part of the plenum and shook hands with opposition leader, member of the Knesset, Yair Lapid. He was the recent prime minister before Netanyahu, and National Unity Chairman MK Benny Gantz. However, no compromise proposals bore fruit, and the bill passed. Let's see. That may be it for this article. Okay, so let's look at Netanyahu. Now, you might remember that I did a video about him suffering a heat injury, or at least that's what people were saying at the time. I did a video talking about how, like, around the same time, him, Jason Aldean, and then this rapper, I can't remember his name, they all suffered heat injuries. We were talking about how the earth is heating and temperatures are rising and stuff like that. But let me show you some new things. Okay, Times of Israel. Netanyahu released from hospital following implantation of pacemaker. So this is after that initial incident of him passing out at the Sea of Galilee and hitting his head. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was released Monday morning from hospital following the installation of a pacemaker early Sunday that doctors said was needed after he suffered a potentially fatal heart interruption. Go away video, please. Okay. Quote, "As you can see, I'm doing very well. We are continuing our efforts to complete legislation and also our efforts to do it by agreement. Tomorrow morning, I will join my colleagues in the Knesset. In the meantime, thank you very much," Netanyahu said. And it doesn't have the video here, but I watched it, and he is like standing up. I think as though to prove, like, look, I'm doing fine. And like he says here, as you can see, I'm doing very well. Which he would probably say if that's actually what happened, but it may also be a message if there was some kind of assassination attempt on his life to show his enemies that they didn't succeed. Now, I don't have any proposals as to what could have caused this. They're saying one thing in the news that, oh, it's because of a heart interruption, and they can say whatever they want. If there was some kind of assassination attempt on him, I don't think that they would just broadcast that out loud if they could keep it quiet. There's that possibility. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but anyway, continuing. Doctors who implanted the pacemaker early Sunday morning later revealed that Netanyahu had suffered a potentially life-threatening transient heart block. A subcutaneous heart monitor implanted a week ago registered the danger and issued an alert. They said, prompting Netanyahu's immediate hospitalization in the fitting of a pacemaker. The doctors also acknowledged that they had spotted irregularities in an electrocardiogram test when he was hospitalized last week, but had nonetheless assured the public that the premier's heart was completely normal. Official results released by the hospital and the Prime Minister's office at the time listed dehydration as the cause of his hospitalization and specifically stated, quote, "At no point was any heart arrhythmia found," end quote. However, in a video statement released by Sheba Medical Center on Sunday morning, it was revealed that the Prime Minister has a history of heart conduction problems. So, who knows if that's true or not? Maybe it is. Oh, here's a picture of him while he was doing that video, so you can see him standing, and he's telling everybody that he's okay. All right, so that was a weird thing. So regardless of what it was, if you can take this story at face value or not, the fact of the matter is it's coming out in the media that there was some issue with his heart, which made me think about a couple things. Luke 21, verse 26 and 27. Men's hearts failing them for fear. So we have to remember that part, for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. That's the sign of the Son of Man. So I'm not so sure that his heart failed because of fear, or if it even did fail, or if there was some other issue. You know, um, I mean, some things that are coming to mind right now, like what if there was like a poisoning of some sort, or what if it didn't even have to do with his heart, but that's what they're saying happened? What if it was like some other thing? I don't know. There's just some things to think about. But again, the thing I think to focus on with this is in the news is saying that it was his heart that failed, and that could be a sign to us, to the people of Israel, right? When you have the heart fail of the leader of your nation, if you're looking at that in a symbolic context and potentially a sign from the Lord, that's probably not a very good sign, because they represent the nation. Because the wider context is, well, it's Israel's heart that's failing, and that's why all this unrest potentially. Israel has been around for 75 years. It celebrated its 75th birthday this year, and things have gone pretty well. This is the first time they're saying that this is the worst that protests have ever been in the history of Israel. And I don't even remember any other protests. I'm sure that there have been from time to time, but this by far is the worst. So maybe it's really fitting that the prime minister would have, at least publicly, according to the media, would have something wrong with his heart. Doctrine and Covenants 45, verse 26, and in that day shall be heard of wars and rumors of wars. That's what's going on right now with Israel, as they're talking about no longer dealing with limited skirmishes, but a multi-front war, essentially led by Iran. And then, of course, across the entire world, other wars and rumors of wars. And the whole earth shall be in commotion, and men's hearts shall fail them, and they shall say that Christ delayeth his coming until the end of the earth. And you guys, again, I think that we should take seriously, we should watch very closely what's happening right now, because the siege on Jerusalem and the overall war of Gog and Magog in the Battle of Armageddon, it may not play out the way that we think. It may not be so obvious. Otherwise, how could this statement be true, that people are going to say that Christ delayeth his coming until the end of the earth? Some of you would say, well, the church as a whole will know, and probably a lot of Christians, those that are religious, but this only refers to like the secular people of the world, people that, atheist, agnostic, some other religion. I don't know, that could be true, but I tend to think that it's only if you're really watching that you're going to know, that it requires watching. That's why, again, I was able to put together um, this whole list of scriptures. Let me pull this up. Let's go to quotes, common misconceptions. There's one that has to do with watching for the signs. Okay, the misconception that has to do, we shouldn't watch for signs of the second coming. We should only focus on the here and now. And there's a whole slew of scriptures telling us that we need to watch, so that we'll be ready. If some big thing happens, like a gigantic third world war in the conventional sense, in the sense of, in the same style as World War I and World War II, I think that would take away the need for watching for a certain number of people. Does that make sense? But you have all these different scriptures here. Joseph Smith, Matthew 25, Luke 12, Thessalonians 5, Revelation 16, D&C 45 and 50, and then several statements by Joseph Smith himself. So anyway, I want to impress upon your mind that this could be more serious than what it appears, because people are expecting the spectacular and the obvious and the grand. And wouldn't it be really fitting if this is the final siege? It would catch so many people off guard. And Christ's words would be fulfilled where he says, I come at a time that ye think not. When we think that there's still, at least a year, there's at least a couple years, 10 years. It's probably going to happen in the 30s. This would catch a lot of people off guard. It's like that video that I did, titled Fast, and it had to do with that explosion in Beirut, Lebanon. It was the port explosion, where essentially the third largest explosion in an urban area occurred. It was on the scale of a nuclear bomb. And the smoke was rising. First it was small, and then it got bigger because there was an explosion where fireworks were being kept. And that went on for a while, but it had reached a new stage where the smoke was just getting really intense, and people were watching it around the city like, wow, that's a really big fire. And then in an instant, the main explosion, and there was no time. There was no time at that point. No one could have possibly predicted that an explosion comparable to a nuclear bomb was going to take place, but it did, and it was fast. Everyone just going about their lives, going to work, jogging, in their homes, and it was all over in an instant. Okay, a couple more things about hearts failing. Recently, President Nelson, in the April 2021 General Conference, in a talk called "What we are learning and will never forget," toward the end of the talk, he says, "We lived in a time prophesied long ago, when, quote, all things shall be in commotion, and surely men's hearts shall fail them, for fear shall come upon all people," end quote. That was true before the pandemic, and it will be true after. Commotion in the world will continue to increase. And this year, 2023, there's been a lot of commotion, both in politics and geopolitics and war and natural disasters and so many other things. I also want to point out, for the 1 millionth time, as you all know, President Nelson, his profession was a heart surgeon. He literally worked on people's hearts. And like I've said before, I think that it's very fitting that he is the prophet right now, as he's working on the heart of the church and the heart of the world. So it's just interesting that Benjamin Netanyahu would have this heart issue at a time when we have a heart surgeon for a prophet. Jeffrey R. Holland, he said, he talked about men's hearts failing them. October 2009 General Conference, safety for the soul. But there's one kind of Latter-day Saint destruction, there's one kind of Latter-day destruction that has always sounded to me more personal than public, more individual than collective. A warning, perhaps more applicable inside the church than outside it. The Savior warned that in the last days, even those of the covenant, the very elect, could be deceived by the enemy of truth. If we think of this as a form of spiritual destruction, it may cast light on another Latter-day prophecy. Think of the heart as the figurative center of our faith, the poetic location of our loyalties and our values. Then consider Jesus' declaration that in the last days, men's hearts shall fail them. And that's true. There's the rise of secularism. And that's what's going on over here right now. We find a picture of it. The rise of secularism, the rise of the use of force to get what you want, screaming and kicking and ruining people's lives, blocking streets, withdrawing services, even though the people that you serve may have voted for that, and yet you're going to punish them because you want to hold on to your control to, because again, we went over the fact that Israel is becoming more and more religious, and the secularists in Israel are in the minority, and so they don't want things to become more religious. The judiciary branch of the country is one of their only power cards. But democracy is about the majority. That's how democracy is defined. It's about voting. It's about voting and seeing what the majority wants. And here you have a minority that is causing all sorts of havoc and trying to impose their will on others as they fight for secular values and as they fight for abominations and as they fight for the prevailing evil philosophies of today. And I'm sure there's probably some good people that are good there, but it's mostly a secular versus religious thing. And that's why I think this is probably happening, because Israel is going in a good direction toward becoming more religious, closer to God. And that upsets the globalists, because that's not what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to become like Europe and become godless. And all these churches and stuff, they're supposed to become relics of the past. We're moving into the Star Trek utopia, the Federation of Nations, you know, where there's no more capitalism. You can do whatever you want. There's no one to tell you that you're doing anything wrong. Just eat, drink, and be merry. That's what these people are fighting for. Their hearts have failed them, as far in the sense of what Jeffrey R. Holland just said. Okay, now Iran, the Jerusalem Post. Now this may be the more concerning aspect of this. Now, for all I know, the final siege on Jerusalem, it could be as a result of just Israelis themselves being influenced by outside powers to shape the nation into what the globalists want. So that might be how it happens. There may not be any foreign troops in Israel when Christ comes to save the Jews. It could be civil war, helped by the outside. It's an invasion without having to send your own conventional troops into the country. It's an invasion. It's a regime change, whatever you want to call it. Or, I don't know, maybe this is as the result of Iran and Russia. Maybe Iran wants this to happen and they just want Israel to become weakened, and so it's happening because of Iran. I don't really know. I tend to lean right now toward the globalists helping along this color revolution, but Iran media celebrates possible Israel civil war and Netanyahu's crisis analysis. Here they are, megaphones in hand, stickers, shirts, keychains, whatever. Pro-Iran media on Sunday feasted on Israel's apparent crisis, focusing on the protests and internal divisions in Israel. Israel's pro-regime media has for months sought to highlight the protests sweeping Israel, portraying them as an existential crisis for the quote-unquote Zionist regime. Iran, which usually boasts of threats to Israel, believes that real threat is internal. No longer does Iran have to pretend Israel will collapse from conflict. It now believes Israel may collapse internally. And therefore, all Iran has to do is sit by the proverbial river and wait. Iran's media on Sunday said that Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Nasser Kanani, had referenced reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in the hospital. The Iranian ministry spokesman then claimed that, quote, now look at this, the crisis in the heart of the Zionist regime is deeper than the crisis in the heart of its prime minister. I mean, they are looking at that in a symbolic way, in a different way, but, well, maybe not. No, that the issues in Israel are deeper than what just happened to Benjamin Netanyahu in his heart. Tasnim is considered pro-regime, and the Iranian regime, and close to the IRGC in Iran. Iran is clearly paying close attention to developments in Israel. The regime noted through its media that protesters had reached Jerusalem and that they had, quote, set up their tents in front of the Zionist Knesset building. The opponents have threatened to prevent the holding of the session of Israeli parliament on Sunday and Monday in order to review and approve the bill to reduce the powers of the judiciary. Well, they weren't successful at preventing it, although they did block it at one point. Oh, here they are again. Yeah, you got to have the red flares and, the face coverings, megaphones, all the typical things. You can't have a good protest without all those things. And also ruining people's lives everywhere, just innocent people, as you have your temper tantrum. In another report at Fars News, the report looked at other regional media reports that, quote, the current unrest could lead to civil war and have a real impact on the state of the occupation regime's military institutions. And there's been a lot of talk about that. It's already happening in one sense that you have these reservists that are stepping down, and it's at least more than 10,000 now. I don't have like a complete number, but it's a lot. This report looked at potential red lines that could be crossed in Israel, speculating that, quote, political assassinations and the occurrence of a state of rebellion in the Israel army could lead to civil conflict. And I obviously don't know how likely that is, but maybe it could go that far. Could there be like a military coup that's in the works? Don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Could things break out into a civil war? I don't know. I guess we'll see. Are those that are opposed to these bills, because it's not just one, it's just that the first one passed today. Could they be disheartened by this one, and then kind of like regroup, ahead of the next bill that they want to push through? I don't know. All we can do is just see. There's a whole lot of possibilities, some of which are a little bit scary. If Israel went to civil war, again, of course, that would be a prime time for Israel's enemies to attack, I would imagine. Okay, Al-Mayadeen, which is also considered pro-Iran, ran a headline Sunday suggesting that Israel's prime minister and his coalition is concerned about Netanyahu's surgery and warnings of a military coup against him. This report also focused on reports that, quote, 10,000 reservists from 40 units announced leaving service, while Israel Channel 13 reported that the number of refusals to serve in the Air Force will increase. End quote. Pro-Iran media and Iran's own regime media have often message discipline. This means that the region has a message, and then that message trickles down to Iran's own media, the pro-regime media ecosystem, and then the regional pro-Iran media. This means that often what Iran is thinking is very transparent because it has a top-down approach to broadcasting its views in propaganda. So they just put it out there and they do it through their media. Sometimes this can also serve as a warning or predictor of the regime's behavior. The regime thinks Israel is being challenged internally. Iran, therefore, has increased tensions on the northern border and sought to increase threats from Jenin and Hamas. And we've covered that. For the first time in nearly 20 years, rockets were fired from the West Bank, and that's where Jenin is. And they did a big, the biggest operation in 20 years, military operation in the West Bank, centered on Jenin. A recent report at Newsweek also warned of Iranian threats from Syria, where Iran has local proxies. So, all this isn't really too new. We've actually read other stories that have basically touched on what the enemies of Israel are thinking as they're watching these protests and this internal crisis. But this is the first time that we've read anything about them thinking that there could be a military coup against Netanyahu. And man, if that happens, holy cow. Holy cow. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the present. That's all that I really have to share right now, but I did want to look really quick at some of these live blogs. First, I don't think that this is anything. I'm just going to bring it up, though. This is like the second most recent story, but it was also reported on about 2 hours ago. Brush fire blazes in Jerusalem hills. Now, just a brush fire, but you never know. What if, like, the burning at the second coming? What if it actually was an actual fire? Probably not. I tend to agree the way that the different quotes from prophets and apostles in church manuals have said that the fire probably is in reference to Christ's glory when he comes. So that's what ultimately will burn the wicked. But whatever the case, on the same day that this happened, there's a brush fire going on in Jerusalem. Residents of Kibbutz Sova are evacuated alongside visitors of the Kitzuba amusement park. So, I don't know. And it's and just like how we've talked about other wildfires, specifically the wildfires in Canada darkening the skies over Canada and the United States and Portugal and Spain, the sun is being darkened and the moon turned to blood. I guess it depends on how big this comes, but you can see a lot of smoke. But I guess we'll see how big that gets. Just something interesting. Okay, let's update this. This is Haaretz. Israel's democracy crisis. Netanyahu coalition passes judicial coup. Okay, so, and they're a very liberal news company. Judicial coup, right? Law amid national conflict. The thing about this, opponents to this, is that they're following the legal process to change laws. They don't have a constitution. They have the Declaration of Independence, but they're following whatever legal procedures they have, and they're doing it the right way, because a people has a right to self-determination. And if they're doing it the legal way, why would you try and stop that, especially when everybody has been elected? That's democracy. It's so delusional and so backwards. I just can't. If there were like other qualifiers, like it was really clear that Netanyahu was installed by like a foreign power, or there was something like just very illegitimate about the current government, then maybe that would be reason to do this. But I haven't seen anything like that or anybody claiming that. They just don't like it. It's unbelievable. Ex-Shin Bet chief protests in Jerusalem, vows to fight with all the tools at our disposal. Well, what is Shin Bet? I have no idea. Shin Bet. Uh, the Israel Security Agency. Oh, wonderful. Better known by the acronym Shabak. Okay, so let's go back. So Shin Bet chief protests in Jerusalem. Okay. With all the tools at our disposal. Well, what's that supposed to mean? Spoke at a protest in Gan Saker, Israel, or Jerusalem, and said that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is, quote, captured by the hands of a coalition that has lost touch with the people. He added, we will fight with all tools at our disposal. Hopefully those are legal tools, but that's questionable. Netanyahu currently meets IDF chief in Jerusalem after refusing to meet him before vote. Thousands protest outside Supreme Court in Jerusalem. Thousands of protesters are demonstrating at various locations in Jerusalem near the Supreme Court building in Saker Park. Supreme Court president and justices visit Germany as Knesset votes to subvert judicial review on government. Okay, whatever. Dozens protest in Tel Aviv, attempt to block Ayalon Highway. Yeah, because that's what you do. You ruin people's lives. Police clash with protesters on Begin Highway in Jerusalem. Arrest 2. Around 2,000 protesters march with torches along Begin Highway in Jerusalem. Police operates water cannons. Oh, how dare they! Make sure to wear all the pink apparel. Make sure to have the LGBTQ flags and all that stuff. Checklist of the fascists. Let me tell you something. If you're like for these protests and you think that this is appropriate behavior, this is how you act in a democracy, blocking highways, trying to prevent lawmakers from entering the Capitol building, or I don't know if they consider that the Capitol building, but from entering where Congress meets. If you think that that's appropriate behavior, let me tell you a little something that I know personally about protests like this. When I was in high school, there was somebody in my high school, some guy. Of course, he was of a counterculture bent. He wanted to do a protest at the Utah State Capitol, and it had to do with like teachers' salaries. And so he was putting up stuff all around the school, like signs and stuff like that. Like, there's going to be a protest on this day. We're going to walk out of school. We're going to go up to the Capitol, and blah 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 blah. And sure enough, people joined him. But there were people. In fact, I decided to go because I was stupid. And you know what my motivation was? It was just to get out of school. It was just like to have a reason to go ahead and go. There was a bunch of other people doing it, and it wasn't just me. There were other people that were going, not because they believed in the protest, but it was just like a way to go have fun, go lash out, whatever. And did it result in anything? No. And it was stupid. And once I realized my stupidity, I came home. To my defense, I was like 16 at the time, but I was very when you're younger, you don't really have your values in place. You maybe you do, you kind of do, but you're also impressionable, and you don't have the best judgment. That's why young people are stupid, and they generally don't know what's best. But you look at these people here. I don't think that they really have really solid core values. I think some of them are there for fun. Some of them are they just want to lash out against the religious majority, because they want to continue in their lifestyles and stuff like that. the eat, drink, and be merry lifestyle, and so they decide to join these kind of protests. Oh, cool, get off work. Oh, my company is shutting down. Uh, we're not going to be open for a couple days. Awesome. I'm going to go and do this, hang out with friends, take pictures of myself and put it on social media, just to show how passionate I am and how I'm fighting for justice and blah, blah, blah. Sorry, that's how I think. I don't like it. I don't trust these people. Again, there's probably a few genuine ones that really think that this is right and what has to happen, but it still goes. You can't make an argument that goes along with democracy and what democracy is about. Oh, here we go. The book Israelis must read today to understand their new reality. I suppose this is Netanyahu and, oh my gosh, so ridiculous. Anger erupts in Jerusalem streets, roads blocked after reasonableness law approved through the democratic process. Let me refresh this really quick. I'm just going to scroll through here. Protest leaders vow to fight to the end. say they've only just begun. Well, okay. I guess we'll see. Yeah, burn things in the street. Yep. Totally appropriate behavior. Protest organizers say they will ramp up demonstrations against the government of destruction, quote unquote, and vow to fight them to the very end. They think the, quote, unprecedented democratic movement. No, it's not a democratic movement. You know what a democratic movement is? It's going to the voting box and voting. And following the will of the people, those that voted, the majority. That's what democracy is. That has arisen in reaction to the government and say, we've only just begun. Police use water cannons as protesters continue to block major Jerusalem road. Thanks a lot. I'm just trying to get to work. I'm trying to live my life. But our elected government is, don't you know it, passing laws, and I voted for them, but now I get to feel your wrath because it goes against your agenda. Anti-government protesters plan major rally outside Knesset at 6 p.m. What time is it right now in Israel? It is exactly 6 p.m. It's starting right now, or that's when it's scheduled for. Holy cow! I can't believe that just happened. It's 6 p.m. right now. Anti-government. Oh my gosh! Anti-government protesters plan major rally outside Knesset at 6 p.m. Protesters against the government are planning a major rally outside the Knesset at 6 p.m. The demonstration will include former security chiefs, former top jurists, and politicians. That's what's concerning, because if you have a lot of them, then in the eyes of the protesters and those that are opposed, it makes them feel like they have legitimacy, and it just like exacerbates things. Because if there is a chance for a civil war or something like that, you have these guys leading the way. and you have the validity of saying, well, look, our ex-prime minister, our ex-security chief, da 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 da. So it's concerning. 1 hour ago, Jerusalem protesters call for mass rallies. Some block Begin Highway. It's just a bunch of, it's just a bunch of hippies and hipsters. Coalition MKs invite opposition to hold negotiations over next overhaul steps. All right, so, country's top labor union to announce labor dispute threatening strike over legislation. Legislation. Gosh. Yep. So make the country pay. Make everyone who voted pay. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, see, only 2 hours ago, reasonableness bill approved in second reading, third imminent. Well, wait, but that's how recent this was at the time that I'm making this. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. So, I don't know. I can't say anything with certainty, but I think that we would do well to watch this closely. Just keep an eye on how things unfold and be open to the possibility that this could be it. Don't ever think that, oh no, that we still haven't seen this. I know how things are supposed to happen and we haven't seen it yet. You don't know. You don't know. Um, you might think that you know, and maybe you're right, but you have to wait and actually see. And you have to take into account everything that I said. That the Lord comes at a time that you think not. And that warfare may just look different now than it did back during World War II and World War I. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.